Thanks, Niall. Good morning, everyone. Hello. Good afternoon and good evening to those joining from different regions and countries. We would love to see some faces. If you are comfortable, go ahead and turn on your videos. We would love to see you. This is going to be an interactive session, so we would really appreciate your participation, interaction. Would love to hear from you all. Hi, Lisa. Hello. Good to see you. Where are you joining from? Hello from Vietnam. Your fifth session. Yes, today is the fifth session on jobs and social protection. I hope you're all
I'm
having a good
joining.
time. Yes, yes.
Sorry, I'm joining from Ohio in the US. But
Oh,
there
lovely.
must be more interesting places other people are coming from.
Good morning to you. I'm sorry, I could be mispronouncing it, but Nguyen from Vietnam. Hello, good to see you.
Hello, good to see you. It's very nice to have new knowledge and interaction with other participants from other parts of the world. Very excited for today's session. The theme is very important. I'm very interested in jobs and social protection because at this moment I have a fellowship in Africa and we mentioned skill jobs and we also
Mhm.
mentioned human rights and social protection very important. Thank you.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Thanks for joining us today. I see Sammy joining the meeting. Hi, Sammy.
Hi, it's very nice to be here. I'm joining from Finland on behalf of Statistics Finland. I'm doing my internship there at the Department of International Affairs. And when it comes to SDGs, I think yesterday someone said that the SDGs, when talking about them, the discussion begins with data and ends with data. So it's been a great pleasure for me to attend these webinars.
That's great to hear. I'm sure we'll talk about some interesting statistics today as well. Anna has some figures ready for you, so we'll dive into those very shortly. I see some comments in the chat. People from Kenya, Haiti, and UNDP Accelerator Lab from Bosnia. Lovely. I think that's brilliant. Since now we have good participation, we'll start the session, the fifth session on jobs and social protection for SDGs in practice. I hope all of you can see my screen. If yes, could you please respond with a reaction, thumbs up? Um, that would tell me that you're all present. Thank you. Thanks, Sammy. Thanks, Beatrice. Thanks, Anna. Thanks, Marites. Thanks, Lisa. All right, perfect. Okay, so again, a very pleasant morning to everyone joining from the US. Good afternoon and good evening to those joining from other parts of the world. Thank you all for joining us today for this session on jobs and social protection, topics that touch everyone's lives alike, regardless of where we live or what we do. Access to decent work and social protection is critical for social well being and personal dignity. As for me, I am Bhavika and I come from India, where incidentally, there are also some of the largest social protection programs at work currently. And that sparked my interest in this area, leading me to join the training vertical of the International Labour Organization last year. Over here, I design and conduct regional and international trainings on how to design evidence based policy for decent work and social justice for all. You are all welcome to also go through our website and find out these trainings, and also register yourself or send in a request to us, and we'll be very happy to have you participate with us in those trainings. Today, I will be joined by my dear colleagues, Anna and Beatrice, to also share their insights, and who will be also introducing themselves at the beginning of their respective presentations. By the end of this session, you will get an idea of what needs to happen at the country level in order to tackle the persistent challenges from the world of work, and in order to make the ongoing transitions just for both workers and their families. Before we have a deep dive into that, first let's have a quick check-in on how do you feel today. I would request you all to either scan this code or just quickly type in mentimeter.com on Google, and you can insert the code showing on your screens. Once you're all there, please send me a thumbs up so I can present the question next. You can use your cameras, you can use other applications wherein you can open your camera and scan the code. It should be relatively easy, but if you are stuck, then feel free to unmute yourself and raise the query. Oh, perfect. We already have some answers. So you'll see that there is a scale of cat, there's an image, and how do you feel on that scale? I can understand that some of you have just woken up, you are still in bed, while others on the Asia Pacific end are, it's the end of the day, so they might be preparing to go back to bed. But let's find out how you all feel together. Okay, so we have 3. Okay, that's interesting. On 7 curious cats. All right. The person, okay, I'm glad there is nobody who selected 1, because then that would be bad news for me. And number 6, okay, we have a sleepy head in the room. All right, great. So now that we know where we are, let's go back to the presentation. Okay, so for you all, you must have also seen this as a PDF on the website under this event, but we'll just quickly go through it for you all to know that today we'll be discussing that how do SDGs link to social justice and the world of work, which will be presented by me, followed by a presentation by Anna on the Global Accelerator on Jobs and Social Protection for Just Transitions, who will also be leading a case study towards the end of the session. So I hope you all will be listening keenly and actively, because you'll have to answer the questions at that point. After the Global Accelerator slides, we'll have Beatrice presenting on the role of workers' organizations. After that, towards the end, right before the closing, we'll have a very short Q&A session for you to share your thoughts, share your questions, and if you have any questions about our work or about the presentation, we'll be very happy to answer those for you. And in the end, I'll be closing the session. There will be a conclusion, and then I think you'll have other sessions lined up for the day. Now, we live in times marked by compounding crises. Recently, we have seen numerous headlines about economic challenges and labor market disruptions worldwide, from COVID-19 and the after effects of the pandemic to rising unemployment rates, and to the growing need for social protection in the face of these natural disasters and pandemics. These issues are more relevant than it's ever been. So, where does the International Labour Organization come in? Where are the foundations of the same? Many ideas which we now take for granted, from gender equality to non-discrimination in the workplace, were actually first discussed at the international level by the International Labour Organization, going as back as 1919, while the world was still struggling to rebuild and rebound from the ravages of First World War. The ILO was created in the belief that social justice is essential to universal and lasting peace. There was a famous saying that if you want peace, then you must promote social justice. And that is where the founding conviction of ILO comes in, that uh, the founders of ILO were really passionate about, and they made social justice the ultimate goal of the organization. The initial social contract was premised on the recognition of principle of freedom of association, enabling a unique form of governance. What sets ILO apart from the other agencies is the role of tripartism. You will always find that um, in order for you to describe how ILO is different from the other organizations, you can just use this word, which is tripartism, wherein the three constituents come together, which is governments, employers, and workers. And they come together, there is a social dialogue, and then consensus is reached on many, many issues regarding the world of work, which could be minimum wage rate, which could be working hours, or occupational safety and health, numerous issues. And that is what sets ILO apart from all the other organizations in advancing social justice, where it brings together these three critical components um, of change. In terms of the ILO origins, one can ask that it's been more than a century that ILO has existed. As I mentioned earlier, that it was founded in 1919, and right now it's 2024, so it's well over 100 years. And why is it that the organization has survived for so long? One of the reasons is legitimacy, that there are certain labor standards that have been set by the organization, which are universal and followed by certain conventions, which countries go ahead and ratify. I'm sure that the countries that you all come from, there will be certain ratifications that your countries have taken up. The second reason is relevance. It's that the organization has kept up with the changing times, bringing about different conventions and standards in different years, some of which are listed here and which we'll see in detail in the next slides. The first one is the 1944 Philadelphia Declaration, wherein this famous quotation was brought about that labor is not a commodity. You cannot bargain or negotiate for labor for profit gains. There has to be certain freedom of association and expression uh, to ensure progress within the country and for laborers as well. And uh, poverty anywhere constitutes a danger to prosperity everywhere. So it's very critical that social justice is ensured. And how do you bring that about is what is laid down in this declaration and the following labor standards that came about. Policies in regard to wages and earnings calculated to ensure a just share of the fruits of progress to all, and a need for such a protection. The extension of social security measures to provide a basic income to all in need is the protection that is quite comprehensive, and that is the need of the hour. And hence, we had the Philadelphia Declaration. Next, we have the 1998 Declaration on Fundamental Principles and Rights at Work, which focused on the abolition of child labor, on elimination of discrimination in respect of employment and occupation. We have also mentioned how we label them. So you can go back, you can look it up on our website, and you will find details on how these were brought about and what are the different details of the same. In 2008, there was a declaration on social justice for fair globalization, which involved promoting employment by creating sustainable institutional and economic environment, developing and enhancing measures of social protection, and promoting social dialogue and tripartism. Again, building those blocks further. And lastly, respecting, promoting, and realizing the fundamental principles and rights at work, which forms a very large component of social justice as we understand at the ILO. Now it's time for you to answer, what does social justice mean to you? You can go back to the link that you had used previously, or you can scan again. I can go back to the slides if you want to look at the QR code. Okay, we have a few responses coming in. About 7 of you have responded. So it is peace, fairness, peacefulness, righteousness, equity, correcting wrongs, free association, free will, income redistribution. Okay, that's nice. Transparency, equality, dignity. Absolutely. Respect, changing structures, equal opportunity. Okay, the peace is that one word that comes to your mind. Great. Inclusion, yes, another important word. Okay, lovely. Let's now see, how does the ILO describe it? So how do we advance social justice through decent work? First up, we look at the 4 pillars of social justice, which is very similar to what all of you have answered. So congratulations to you. Kudos to you that you were able to get around to how we at ILO think about social justice. The first part is equal access to opportunities, as one of you correctly mentioned in the poll. The second is fair distribution. The third is just transition. We have a comprehensive presentation prepared by Anna, who will be talking about this in detail right after me. And the fourth pillar is universal human rights and capabilities. When we combine the 4 of these together, we can definitely achieve social justice. First up is what we also saw in the previous slide, the fundamental principles and rights at work. This is one of the components coming in from the decent work, that what is it that is required for individuals to work with dignity. This is one of the components of that. The second is full, productive, and freely chosen employment, which is again the freedom of association, as we have been talking about. The third is social protection and labor protection. Again, how do we ensure workers' rights and entitlements while protecting them? And in bringing all this together, how do we ensure social dialogue and tripartism to also flourish with the 3 constituents: governments, employers, and workers? Once we have all of this in place, we will find that there is an enhanced inclusion and effective governance of work. The second would be that there will be an ensured access to full, productive, and freely chosen employment and lifelong learning. It will revitalize labor market institutions for fair outcomes, wherein all individuals have equal access to opportunities, and also there is a fair distribution of opportunities among all. And lastly, it will protect people over life cycle and make transitions equitable. So this is one framework that we at ILO subscribe to and we also promote. And if you consider your own respective countries, you will find that these are such critical components that for a country to achieve social justice through decent work, these components are absolutely critical, without which it will be hard to achieve the same. Now, what is decent work? We have been talking about decent work, social justice, social protection all this while. But as a definition, if we go back to the basics, decent work is productive work. The productive work is very important here. So kindly note that. It is a productive form of work for women and men in conditions of freedom, equality, security, and human dignity, with fair income, security in the workplace, and social protection for workers and their families, along with the prospects for personal development. You'll see that if you pick different aspects of this definition, these are very closely aligned to what social justice means. And that is why decent work and social justice go hand in hand. Now, this is a nice house of decent work wherein we have put together 4 different components of what will constitute a decent work. First is having a decent income. It should be a standard to ensure that all workers earn enough to survive and participate as active citizens in society. I remember there was a recent training that we were conducting, international training, wherein we had many participants joining from various countries. And there was this concern by the participants in the training that in their countries, the minimum wage is very low, and it's even under the living wage. So a major component of decent work is ensuring that there is a decent income, that the minimum wage is also corresponding to the living wage, and all the workers are able to lead that decent life with dignity. The second one is secure work. Post pandemic, post COVID-19, I think all of us have somewhere faced this, that there has been some concerns around insecurity or instability of our employment. And this is something that is a challenge that we are all trying to mitigate, not only at ILO, but also at our individual national levels with our governments. So how do we ensure that stability of employment and secure work is also something that constitutes decent work? Third is a quality work environment, which will be including both physical and mental well-being. On the rise, there has been this importance and the due importance given to mental health at workplace. So that is also a component that will be under a quality work environment. And lastly, it will be workers' voice, wherein the workers must have the ability to genuinely influence decisions in the workplace, company, and industry. So if we put these 4 together and we are able to ensure these for the workers, we can say that they have decent working conditions. Now for social dialogue, which is again one of the very critical components of our work at ILO, is that we bring together government, employers organizations, and workers organizations, and we bring them to the same table, discuss these issues, and try to design policies in a way that all the 3 parties reach a consensus at the end of the day, and then that policy is finalized. Social dialogue is something that you, through your own experiences, would have also come across as a very critical component, wherein these 3 stakeholders are at the epicenter of decent work and social justice, and which is why it's all the more important that all of these 3 work together. This is just a nice start from ILO's website, that how is it that social dialogue is facilitated among the different constituents from different countries and just departments in the ILO, wherein we focus on different aspects of the same. Now, going back to SDGs in practice, what all of you have been hearing for the past couple of days, now we'll see that how is that related to decent work and social justice. So we see that SDG 8, which is on decent work and economic growth, is directly linked to the very pillars or the very fundamentals of ILO as well, wherein one of the components is opportunities for productive work, that there should be equal opportunities, there should be fair income, which we had just seen that there should be a decent income. Next is security in the workplace, social protection for families, better prospects for personal development, social integration, which is also a part of something that we just saw in the last slide, that there should be that integration that wherein the worker has the influence in their respective industries and their organizations, and they have a voice, and that voice is also given due importance. There is freedom of expression and association, that labor is not a commodity, and instead that they are free to choose whichever best alternative is available to them in terms of livelihood opportunity. And lastly, equality of opportunity and treatment. So as we saw earlier, there has to be this standard that there is both physical and mental stability, and all of the workers are treated equally with that equal opportunity quotient. The next SDG is SDG 1, which is on no poverty. Now, how to end poverty through social protection? We'll see that by providing adequate social protection to the population throughout their lives, one can prevent poverty by reducing inequality and by combating social exclusion. In many countries, especially these days, it's on the rise that discrimination has been on the rise, right? And in these times, it becomes all the more important that there is a social protection umbrella wherein they are protected, and social exclusion in particular is reduced. Now, this cannot be a temporary arrangement, but it has to be a robust, reliable, and sustainable mechanism which ensures that the poverty is ended by providing this universal social protection. It will be built on national consensus achieved through inclusive social dialogue. So you will see that without social dialogue, any of the goals that one tries to achieve, it's going to fall short somewhere. So all of the stakeholders must come together. There should be a consensus, and at a country level, there should be a national consensus, which can be achieved only and only through inclusive social dialogue. It should also be embedded in law to provide rights and obligations for current and future generations. There are many participants in our trainings usually who write about legislative reforms, because no change would be sustainable if it is not embedded in the country's law. So I think all of these components put together, while making sure that it is adequately and sustainably financed. Again, the state comes in for this. When we take these points together, we will be a step closer to achieving SDG 1, which is on reducing poverty, or the best case scenario would be ending poverty. And with that, I would hand over to my colleague Anna, who will walk us through just transitions and on the global accelerator. So over to you, Anna.
Thanks a lot, Bhavika, and hi everyone from my side as well. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Anna Brachtendorf. I work in the Universal Social Protection Department at the ILO. And there I work on a specific UN-wide initiative that aims to accelerate the progress that we have to make to achieve the SDGs. I'm sure you've all heard in all the previous presentations that we are falling behind. 2030 is very soon, and we are not there yet. So this is what we are working on. This initiative is called the Global Accelerator on Jobs and Social Protection for Just Transitions. But before I explain the details of the initiative, we're going to think a little bit about these very large challenges that we face currently related to universal social protection and decent work. So SDGs 8 and 1, as Bhavika just explained. So, okay. So if you could scan this QR code again and go to Mentimeter and simply click those that apply to your situation or your country. Yeah, and it's great. You can choose multiple responses if you think that several responses are appropriate. Yeah, so we have what already Bhavika mentioned earlier, the income levels that are too low for life above the poverty line. That's a big challenge in many countries. Lack of work opportunities. That's also a really important point that we will touch upon, the creation of jobs, but then not the creation of any jobs, but to make sure that the jobs that are created are productive and contribute to decent work. Excellent. Yeah. Insufficient funding and budget constraints, that's a big problem. Excellent, yeah. Thanks a lot for all of your responses. Perhaps we move on, but it's good to think about these, what we call decent work deficits. So these are all challenges that keep you from, or that keep a population in a country from having access to decent work. So I will now present you some numbers that make clear the order of magnitude, right? So we were just looking at the national context, and now we are zooming out and we are looking at the global context. So first of all, the first number I'd like to show you is that in 2022, around 600 million people were estimated to be living in extreme poverty. But many, many more people than this live in poverty according to national standards today. So extreme poverty, someone was talking about data before. This is an important point. Extreme poverty is one measurement, but of course, every country has a different way of measuring poverty. So according to these ways, there are many more people living in poverty. The fact that they already live in poverty, of course, by itself is a problem. But if we look at what is happening in the world today, the fact that they live in poverty makes them even more vulnerable to ongoing transitions and shocks. So if we think about climate change and the effects of climate change, right? If you have extreme weather events like typhoons, droughts, flooding, things like this, the people living in extreme poverty or poverty are much more vulnerable to suffer from this more intensely and for longer. So, and with this, of course, come economic shocks, right? So if an area is flooded, for example, if you remember the extreme floods that happened in Pakistan, this is, of course, a shock in terms of the climate shock. And then in connection to that, people experience an economic shock. So that's why, in addition to, of course, being a problem from a human rights perspective, it's also a problem from a perspective of looking into the future, how things will develop. Then in 2023, 4 billion people, so this is around half of the world's population, lacked access to any kind of social protection. So this means that they did not have any access to, for example, health insurance, pension, work accident insurance, only to name a few of the 9 branches of Social Security. This is a huge problem for several reasons. So on the normative level, of course, everyone has a right to social protection. It's a human right, which is codified in the Universal Declaration for Human Rights. But on a practical level, there's also a problem, because a person that is living above the poverty line, but then they fall ill, right? And they need treatment, or they have an accident at work and they need to stop working for a while. will most likely, so a person like this will most likely no longer have any income if they are not covered by social protection. So in addition, they lose their income, and in addition, they will have to use their savings, their personal savings, if they have any, to receive treatment, perhaps for their injury or illness, and to support their family. So very quickly, there is a risk of falling into poverty or into extreme poverty. So as Bhavika mentioned earlier, social protection is very good at preventing that. The next figure is that also in 2023, 435 million people, that's 11.1% of the population of working age, so those between 15 and 65, wanted a job, but were not able to find one. So this means that there's a lot of inefficiency in labor markets. These people, these 435 million, would have liked to earn a wage and contribute to economic development, but they were not able to do this, right? Normally, a government would want them to contribute. They themselves want to contribute. So normally there should be, they all agree, they all want the same thing. But there are these inefficiencies in the labor market that prevent this from happening. And there is another issue hidden behind this number, that across all country income groups, so low income, lower middle income, middle and high income countries, this gap, this number is higher for women than for men. So this difference is more pronounced in low income countries. There, this jobs gap, what we call it, so this amount of people who wanted a job but were unable to find one, is almost 7 percentage points higher than for men. So there are some aspects of gender equality hidden there. There is also a link between these two issues of social protection and jobs. And this is what we also try to work on with the Global Accelerator. Around 50% of workers are in what we call informal employment. So this means that they don't have a secure job. They don't have an employment contract. There's no clear employer, for example, when we think of the platform economy. And because of this, they do not have access to social insurance beyond perhaps a bare minimum that the state might provide for the whole population, whether they are employed or unemployed. So in many countries, these workers in informal employment cannot contribute to social protection schemes because they are excluded, and they do not pay income tax, which is a problem, of course, also from the perspective of financing, which we saw earlier. Some of you chose that as one of the big challenges, that there is not enough money to finance decent jobs and social protection. So if they cannot pay tax, this is a problem for the government from a fiscal perspective. And in addition, so we have the workers that are in formal employment, and in addition, we have more than 90% of micro and small enterprises that are informal enterprises. So this means that they are not registered officially as enterprises. They're not able to give an employment contract to their workers. They also are not able to pay taxes. And they are not able to contribute to the social protection of their employees. So you can see that in this issue, really the 2 points come together and they are very, very closely linked. This is again a problem in terms of not paying taxes from the perspective of financing for development. But it's important to note that informality is a very persistent challenge that has many, many reasons. So it's not possible to just say, oh, it's the fault of one type of actor or one type of situation, which makes it very, very difficult to address as a problem. So supporting the transition to formality, which is the opposite, can be done through a wide range of measures. For example, there can be employment-centered macroeconomic policies, labor law reforms, including through the ratification of international labor standards, which Bhavika mentioned earlier. Then we have organizing, mobilizing, and engaging in social dialogue. So this is again where this tripartism and social dialogue comes in. It's very important for this as well. The one way can be to address discrimination that excludes some groups from the labor market. So we heard about the difference in the jobs gap earlier for women. So this also applies to other marginalized groups. And it's one important way of reducing informality to include all marginalized groups in the labor market. There are opportunities for supporting entrepreneurship, skills development, access to finance for enterprises, extending social protection, and so on and so forth. So there are many, many ways to work on informality. And the best way is often a combination that also depends on the national context. So as you can tell, for informality, we don't have time to go into all of the details today, but I do encourage you to learn more about the effects of informality and how governments, workers, and employers organizations can support the transition to formality on the ILO's website. So if you just Google ILO and informality, you will find a lot of material and information on this. And then finally, we already spoke about the gender and women's, inequality and women's labor market participation. And another group that has fewer chances on the labor market is youth. So in 2023, 269 million young people were not in employment, education, or training. So this is a statistical category that we have. And in this group, too, young women were overrepresented as compared to men. A high rate of these young people who are not in education, employment, or training usually means that a large number of youths are discouraged workers or do not have access to education or training. This is a problem because if this happens when they are still young, they are at a higher risk of labor market exclusion and social exclusion coming from that. This is something that Bhavika also already mentioned, because they are neither improving their employability by learning skills or gaining work experience. So that makes them particularly vulnerable for shocks as well in the future. On this next slide, we can see that at the same time as these challenges exist and continue to exist and even grow in some instances, we have certain transitions that are taking place globally, right? And you all know them. I just chose these 3 pictures as examples. The first one in the top left picture is the green transition towards ecologically sustainable economies that are carbon neutral and promote biodiversity. And this includes, of course, also the energy transition towards clean energy, the mitigation of the effects of climate change, and the adaptation to the effects of climate change. Another transition that we have is the demographic transition. This looks different in various countries. So depending on where you are from, it takes a different shape. Some countries are experiencing a youth bulge, which means that there are a lot of young people. And other countries are experiencing aging populations, which means that there are a lot of young people. You can imagine it with these population pyramids. One is this way around and the other one is that way around. In either case, this transition has an effect on the work-life transitions. For example, things like leaving education and having a first job, changing types of job, or retiring. And then this has big implications also for the care economy, which in turn has big implications on women's labor market participation, women's labor force participation, sorry. And then the last transition that I'd like to touch upon here is digitalization, automation, and technological development, which, as we all know, affects everyone in their place of work, whether this is like here in this image where there's a production process that now uses robots and technology, or whether you're an office worker and you are suddenly confronted with artificial intelligence. So this affects everyone. And the effects in each country are different depending on how this is regulated and how this is used. So I'm sure as we talked about it, you can tell that these transitions can provide great opportunities for workers and their families and also enterprises, but they can also be great threats. So this is why it's important that the transitions are just. So this is something that Bhavika mentioned earlier as well, right? Just transitions. Now, what does this mean? So we need 3 ingredients for a just transition. So, one of them that makes them particularly just, but in a transition, of course, we need broad-based consensus on which direction we're going in, right? Are we moving towards more carbon neutral economies or away from them, which I don't think we should, but that's on another page. So we need this consensus, which the ILO helps to achieve through social dialogue. This is what Bhavika also already mentioned earlier. Then secondly, we need investments in technology and infrastructure. I think this is also clear. And then thirdly, and this is really important to make a transition just, we need investments in people, right? To maximize the positive effect that the transitions can have on job creation and the expansion of social protection. At the same time, we want to avoid and address potential negative impacts of these transitions, such as job losses. A very simple example is if you imagine workers that work in coal mines and or in other fossil fuel industries, and many countries are trying to phase out coal and other fossil fuels. But what will happen to these workers, right? So we need to keep that in mind, and we need to both reduce the negative impacts on their lives, and also provide opportunities and chances for them to find other types of employment. Yes, Bhavika, sorry, if you could go back to the previous slide, that would be great. Thanks a lot. So this is where the Global Accelerator on Jobs and Social Protection for Just Transition comes in. It's an initiative that was launched in September 2021 by the UN Secretary General as a response to multiple crises that led to job loss and loss of lives, and to increases in poverty and inequality. For example, from the COVID-19 pandemic, we can see that countries recovered very unevenly, and we can still see these effects today. The initiative is also a response to these persistent challenges that I spoke about earlier, and to the ongoing transitions that I just mentioned. So it was clear that there was a need for strong joint action. The Global Accelerator promotes investments in social protection and employment to overcome these challenges, to facilitate demographic, economic, and ecological transitions, which we just spoke about, and enable a people-centered economic recovery. This means that the aim is to support people in the economic recovery, right? Not, I don't know, technology or other kinds of, financial markets, things like this, right? It's both a response to shocks that countries are experiencing, and it can also help prepare them and make them more resilient to future shocks. So now if we go to the next slide, the Global Accelerator, to make it a bit more practical and concrete, has 17 so-called Pathfinder countries, and I'll explain a little bit about that in a minute. You can see the list here and also a small map, and it would be really interesting to see whether we have some participants here who are from Pathfinder countries or work in Pathfinder countries. So if you could scan the QR code and respond to the question, that would be great. Bhavika, can we already see some responses? Thanks a lot. Exactly. Okay, that's great. Yeah. 17 countries from our perspective is a lot. We started with 0 countries, but I'm guessing from the global perspective, it's not a lot. So I'm not surprised that many of you come from countries that are either not Pathfinder countries or not Pathfinder countries yet, perhaps. Perhaps your countries will join in the future. Excellent. Thanks a lot, Bhavika. Great. So yeah, exactly. Thanks a lot. The Global Accelerator has 3 interlinked pillars of action. The first one in blue, you can see here with the number 1, are integrated policy approaches that are more effective at tackling the persistent challenges of informality, inequality, and poverty, which we spoke about earlier, and have an increased impact than non-integrated policies, both on people and on macroeconomic development. The second pillar is on integrated financing. So this is where the money comes in, which includes domestic resource mobilization, but is also complemented by international financial support. So combining the two, and then coupled with the right integrated national strategies and policies, can yield a high return on investment. I will explain how we can imagine this later. And the third pillar is enhanced multilateral cooperation, which includes cooperation within governments, so breaking silos between ministries, cooperation with development partners, of course, with the social partners, meaning the workers and employers organizations, international financial institutions, the UN, and civil society organizations. So we're trying to foster a really broad-based cooperation here. And in the middle of this, you can see the technical support facility, which you can imagine as kind of the ones that are, pushing for all of this, that are supporting this work. And for now, this might seem a little bit abstract, but I'll give you some examples for how these pillars are linked and what is included in them in the next slides. So before we look inside each of these pillars, there are 2 really important points that I want to make. So the first one is a key condition for joining the Global Accelerator. And the other one is the key vehicle for its implementation in countries. So here you can see the condition for becoming a Pathfinder country, which is what we call a country that has joined the Global Accelerator. And this is the high-level political commitment. So we have been receiving letters from presidents, prime ministers, heads of state and government that express these 17 countries. Sorry, Bhavika, if you could go back one click, thanks a lot. That express these 7 countries' high-level political commitment to prioritize decent work and social protection in their national development strategies. So the reason why this is important is that in order to work on employment and or social protection policies, which means to design the policy, to finance it, to implement it effectively, several different government ministries must work together really closely. So of course, this includes, as we can all imagine, the Ministry of Labor and Social Affairs, but of course it also includes the Ministry of Finance. So as soon as we're talking about financing a policy, we need the Ministry of Finance. Then we have perhaps the Ministry of Education and Skills Development. We might have a number of sectoral ministries. For example, we have some countries working in the tourism sector, some countries focusing on agriculture. So all of these ministries must come together to work on this together in order to be more effective than they would be if they're only staying within their own silo. So those of you who work for national governments, who deal with national governments, know how difficult it can sometimes be to find this agreement among ministries, and sometimes even to get ministries to develop a policy together. And through this development, for the high-level commitment, we are able to break these silos, because it's the head of state or the head of government who commits and who says that, yes, we will do this. And then, of course, the line ministries, they all have to follow suit and they have to work together to prioritize job creation and social protection expansion. By working together with the Ministry of Finance, as I said, this can mean that while it's being developed, the policy is already linked to financing. And this will help it become implemented and not just stay as a beautiful plan. And then finally, by working together, the ministries and institutions are better able to identify the key entry points, so the priorities for the Global Accelerator in their country. For example, there might be certain sectors that should be prioritized because they're particularly vulnerable to shocks, or because the potential for employment creation, so job creation in this sector, is really high. And by jointly coming to an agreement, there's a greater likelihood that other ministries will also support these priorities that were selected. So here already you can see that we have interministerial cooperation, which is reflected in Pillar 3. Then we have the work on financing policies, which is in Pillar 2. And then we have the development of integrated approaches to some extent, which is Pillar 1, right? So already you can see how these pillars are reflected in the flesh and blood of the initiative. So this is the key condition, and I hope it's become clear why it's so important, this high-level political commitment. So now we move to the key vehicle of implementation. Pathfinder countries need to consider so-called national roadmaps, that's what we call them, to develop a collective vision of what the Global Accelerator strategy, intended impact, and required coordination is at the national level. So the national roadmap, which you can see here in the center of this slide, contains the relevant acceleration points. So what does the country or the government want to work on in particular to make accelerated progress towards the SDGs? It includes policy gaps, the job creation potential in the country, social protection coverage, and also the gaps in social protection coverage. So who is not covered, or maybe they are covered with health insurance, but not with pension. And it includes decent employment deficits. It also identifies the key integrated sectoral initiatives. So, for example, if a country is working on agriculture and food systems, right, this is like the integration of a sector, where such an integrated approach as it's being promoted by the Global Accelerator is relevant. And the roadmap also needs to include information of how these investments will be financed. So the development of these roadmaps takes place through a participatory approach, which you can also see on the slides, in which all of the actors that are depicted here around the national roadmap are involved, depending on, of course, their interest and their availability. Of course, as I mentioned, this includes the whole of government approach, including various ministries. It also includes the social partners, which are workers and employers organizations, and civil society organizations. It includes the private sector, the UN country team in the respective country, development partners, so this means other donors or other people who are supporting development, and public development banks. So MDBs, these are World Bank or, for example, Asian Development Bank or African Development Bank, actors like this. So we already have testimonies from countries like Namibia, where breaking the silos in which the governments or in which the ministries normally work have a huge impact on policy prioritization. So in Namibia, they are trying to mainstream employment impact assessments of policies. So whenever a new policy is developed, now the Ministry of Labor is pushing the other ministries to include an assessment of how many jobs this will create. It's not to say that every policy must create jobs, but it's important to know, right? If you have several policies that are being developed at the same time and your aim is job creation and you can only finance one, then surely it's best to choose the one that creates the most employment or the most number of jobs. Yeah, and in other countries, we have also seen how helpful it is that the development partners are included in these discussions, and that they can be convinced, of course, also of what the national government is aiming to do and support the country directly at the country level. I'm just going to check the time briefly. I think we have some time left. Great. So before we delve into the 3 pillars, we have another question here prepared for you. Do you think that improving social protection coverage and productive employment opportunities can lead to higher GDP per capita over the long term? So you can scan the code and you can think about this a little bit and respond. Great. 6 answers already. That's excellent. And everyone seems to agree that it can increase GDP significantly over the long term. That's excellent news. Yeah. Thanks a lot, Babika. Yeah. So as you all mentioned, right? So in this first, perhaps I will start with the second image, the image on the right. This explains the virtuous cycle that we are trying to achieve with the Global Accelerator, right? And this also explains why you were all correct in saying that the expansion of social protection and the creation of decent jobs can indeed increase economic growth or GDP per capita, as it was phrased. So the virtuous cycle that we are trying to achieve is that the Global Accelerator promotes investment in the development of policy approaches related to social protection and decent employment, right? That's what we aim for. When we interact with the other UN country teams or with governments, we try to convince them that investments in decent jobs and social protection are good and important, and that there is a return on this investment. It's not only that, they should be, what do you call it, altruistic and, because they're good governments, but also financially, monetarily, in terms of economic growth, it pays off to invest. Of course, these have to be implemented efficiently. And then this results in human capital development, right? So if, for example, you extend social protection to people, it will mean perhaps that the workforce is healthier because they have access to health insurance. It might mean that they have access to more education opportunities because they don't have to be afraid of losing their income when they go and develop skills and learn more. So these are ways in which human capital develops. This, in turn, leads to an increase in productivity. If you have a workforce that is healthier, happier, better educated, they can become more productive, right? They will then have better working conditions and higher levels of income as a result, right? So this only works, of course, if we have job-rich growth, which you can see on the right side of on the left side of the right image, sorry, which is a whole other discussion. There we are talking about, employment-friendly macroeconomic policies. So this is a big assumption. I understand that we have not always had job-rich growth, historically speaking. But for our purposes today, we will assume that it leads to job-rich growth. The creation of jobs, which will be filled also, so it's also a question of what kind of jobs are created, generates higher tax revenues because, of course, you will have employees who pay tax, and the enterprises that create these jobs grow and hence also have to pay more tax, which in turn generates greater fiscal space, which means that the government has more money at its disposal to further invest in decent work, social protection, and just transitions. So ideally, this will all be an upward spiral, as you can see on the right side image. And on the left, you can see these two graphs that show the clear correlation between decent employment and GDP per capita in the blue dots, and social protection coverage and GDP per capita in the red dots. So you can see that the graphs go from the bottom left to the top right. So we can see that there is a very clear link between these components. Okay, then if we look at the next slide, we look at pillar 2. This is just a brief overview. If you are wondering, that's all a great initiative, but who will pay for this and how will this be paid for, right? This is always a question in development, which I'm sure you've also come across in some of the other sessions. The question of money, it's always a big one. So to mobilize resources and financing on the scale that is required to reach SDGs 1 and 8, right? To extend social protection to everyone, so to have universal social protection, and to create the jobs missing so that these 435 people that were looking for jobs but couldn't find one can find a job. The scale of this is far beyond what international financing can achieve. So we cannot get there if we just, ask the rich countries of the world to please donate some money. We will not get there. So we will have to mobilize this funding from domestic resources. So that's the big red box that you can see on the left. And the Global Accelerator will support these Pathfinder countries in developing these resources, for example, by working on tax efficiency, public finance management, or macroeconomic policies to increase fiscal space. So that is one part, the big chunk of the financing. Then this will be complemented by international financing through official development aid, loans, budget support programs, etc. And this is why it's also important that the Global Accelerator works together with public development banks, as I mentioned earlier, things like African Development Bank, Asian Development Bank, Islamic Development Bank, and so on. And these MDBs, just as an aside, they are also interested in increasing their social investments or the social impact of their investments, which is why they are also interested in working together with us as part of the Global Accelerator. And then there is a smaller part, a really, really small part, which is what we are also very busy with at the moment. This is funding that is mobilized, for example, through the UN Joint SDG Fund and other resources, that we receive from our development partners that can kickstart this work at the country level in order to really get this virtuous cycle going. And then on pillar 3, which is on the next slide, we talked about enhanced multilateral cooperation. And I already explained earlier how this pillar is reflected in the high-level commitment, for example, of the Global Accelerator and in the participatory development of the roadmaps. And here you can see some elements of the international dimension of this pillar. So we spoke about the national dimension before, now it's the international dimension. The Global Accelerator has been really well received internationally. And it's building partnerships within the UN and also outside of the UN, which, if you know, for example, the UN Secretary General's Global Compact or Our Common Agenda, it's really important that we start working with actors that are outside of the UN as well, especially in order to raise all of this financing that we need. This is reflected here in the 3rd pillar. Exactly, so we have a collaboration with the World Bank and with other public development banks, as I mentioned. So this was a lot of theory. I hope that you are still with us. And so after all of this theory, I'm really happy to give the floor to Beatrice Di Padua from the International Trade Union Confederation to explain the role and the importance of the participation of trade unions and workers' organizations. Over to you, Beatrice, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Sorry, it took a while for me to find the unmute button once again. Thank you very much, Anna and Bavika, and hi, nice to see you all. I am Beatrice Di Padua, and I work at the International Trade Union Confederation, which is a members-based organization, and all our members are trade unions, so labor unions, workers' unions from all over the world. We operate at international level, and we have organizations working at national and regional level too. And I work on social protection in the Economic and Social Policy Department. So I've been asked to give a short overview of how trade unions and workers are working towards and within the UN Global Accelerator Initiative. I'll be sharing with you some of our priorities and perspectives on the UN Global Accelerator, and I think that my work now will be easier because of the two great presentations from Anna and Bavika that was really full of information, and I'm really glad because I couldn't have shared it better. So that's a great start, and I hope this is of interest to you. So let me go to the first slide. In short, the UN Global Accelerator we can identify three main objectives. I can go quickly through this as they were mentioned already, but extending coverage to the 4 billion people that are currently excluded from any social protection benefit, create 400 million new decent jobs, meaning in sustainable sectors with fair wages, with labor rights, workers' rights, etc., all within a framework of the just transition. Just transitions in this case for a plural, as Anna mentioned, climate, digital, and also within demographic changes. The Global Accelerator really aims at closing these gaps, and these demands are also at the heart of trade union demands for what we call a new social contract to ensure recovery, but also resilience, and where the labor movement has been calling for the creation of 575 million new jobs. So this is really similar to what is proposed from the Accelerator Initiative, and we are very strong advocate for universal social protection for all, and within that the formalization of at least 1 billion of the current informal jobs, and also of course keeping our planet safe, because as a quote, I can say there is no jobs on a dead planet. So we want to keep our planet for ourselves, and so we want to keep it safe through what is a just transition, meaning which ensures decent work, rights, universal rights, but also workers and labor rights, with social dialogue, meaning what was explained very well by Bavika and Anna before, and in general, in a participatory and inclusive decision-making procedures. All of that by 2030. So it's a big challenge, and there's many people working towards that, and that's what we're also calling for. And therefore, unions and the ITUC have been supportive and supporting the UN Global Accelerator Initiative, because this objectives are really overlapping. Something else is very important for unions is that this initiative really aims at bringing together key stakeholders in a more or less institutionalized context at national and also at international level, where social partners, meaning workers and employers organizations, must be included in the spaces of decision making, and this is something that, of course, it's really crucial for unions, because we were saying before, what will happen to the workers during these transitions, and our easy response is ask the workers. So have social dialogue, have tripartite conversations, have consultations with the unions, because often unions are there and are very ready with positions and they actually know what's going on in the different sectors, and they may have ideas on how to deal with different issues and challenges that they are already encountering or they will be facing soon. And so this social dialogue is the official name, but the unofficial name is just talk to the unions, and that's the main message. So these are really trade union topics that I was saying, and social protection is really at the heart of many of this, and it's really overarching because social protection helps people to manage the different risks that can occur throughout people's lives. Here you can see, for example, the distribution of measures of investment into different measures. And this really is a really crucial, I think, that each one of us here in this meeting can see the importance of I don't know, old age support, of children and family or healthcare, unemployment benefits, parental leave and maternity leave, sickness, etc. And this is all particularly relevant for each and every one of us, but this is even more important for addressing the climate emergency through this just transition, which will be just only when social protection systems are in place to prevent poverty and social exclusion for those that are losing or will lose part of their income or even the employment due to the effects of either mitigation of climate change or also helping to deal with the direct effects of climate change, such as floods, droughts, reduction of working hours due to extreme heat or extreme weather conditions. So this is really an overarching and key element for all our discussion, and something that unions are really pushing for. In the context, talking about the context, I know this was mentioned already, so I will not spend much time on this, but there are, despite multiple international commitments to expand social protection and therefore reduce also poverty and inequalities and achieve the SDGs, more than half of the global population has no access to any formal social protection. And this is really this has really close interlinkages with underinvestment. So we can see that one of the main reasons for low coverage rates of social protection benefits is often the level of investment. They are strictly related. This also varies a lot, and there's enormous inequalities between high-income countries that spend around 16% of their GDP on social protection per year, to low-income countries that use 0.7% of their GDP annually allocated towards social protection. So this is a slide that I did very late at night some time ago, and then I thought, why not keeping it? So bear with me. But this is something that I already mentioned, but coverage gaps are really linked to financing, and therefore there's a huge, one of the main demands related to social protection from the union side is, yes, to expand coverage, but how do you do that? You need funding, be it at domestic level, and I saw there was a question about that in the chat, expanding domestic fiscal space, as we call it, through increased progressive taxation, to fight illicit financial flows and to redirecting funds towards social spending. So this is just something that is also really important from the Global Accelerator side. As Anna mentioned before, this is in support from the international level that has to kickstart some sustainable at domestic level without external support, creation of social protection systems. For the Global Accelerator itself, as unions, we really call for an integrated vision of employment and social protection strategies, and this is also one of the objectives of the Global Accelerator, to bring together the different ministries, because something we encounter often as unions, going and trying to talk to the different ministries, is that for example, the climate minister is not really talking to the labor minister, for example, or the labor minister has great ideas, and then the finance ministers are not completely aware or on the same page. So this creating the synergies among different parts of the government is really crucial, and sometimes there's also an education need among for different ministries in governments, that the Global Accelerator promotes policies that are based in international labor standards and human rights, and that there is, again, policy coherence, not only within government's plans, but also with UN cooperation frameworks, etc. We all also think that the ILO should really have a leading role, and it's taken, I think this is happening already, but we're really supporting that, and because it's so crucial that labor standards are overarching in all the projects and policies that are implemented through this initiative. And of course, building capacity, as I was mentioning before, meaning that to ensure that countries will be able to provide full living wages and collective bargaining, formal employment, and sustainable, not only social protection, but sustainable systems in the long term. There's a need for education and for kickstarting procedures that are owned from the domestic stakeholders, meaning the governments, but also the social partners often need trainings or support, technical support. So this is something unions are also calling for. And last but not least, together with the domestic financing, there are some countries that, as we stay right now, as we are not right now, are not able to provide universal coverage of social protection, fair living wages, for example. And so looking at solidarity financing, for example, through a global fund for social protection could be an option. There's other options as debt relief or debt swaps that are out there, or increasing the official development assistance allocated to social protection. And this is something that I can leave some links at the end, maybe to go a bit more in depth. How are unions dealing with the Global Accelerator? So we are, by terms of reference, so to say, unions must be involved in at two levels, at least, international and national level. This is another great image generated by artificial intelligence. And as you can see, both at national and at international level, different people are sitting at a table. And together with this, I think this comes back to the first point of talk to the workers, and workers and civil society should be there, present, both at an international level strategic guidance, but also at national level, coordinating all activities before, during, and after. And in the main, as Anna mentioned before, the creation of this roadmap, meaning identifying current trends in employment, in social protection, for the just transition, and identifying the gaps that are needed to be closed by policy solutions. And we really need workers to be in there and to be able to input in these roadmaps. And what we're doing right now is, okay, I can skip the Pathfinder countries because you saw that already, and we saw where the participants are from. But what we're doing right now is at the ITUC level. So we are coordinating the union group that is participating in at the different levels. We created a so-called union coordination group on the Global Accelerator that has met twice this year and will continue to meet, composed by representatives from each country. And I don't know where the people who are following this training are from, but if you're interested in reaching out to any of these people, you can let me know, of course. And also we nominated a spokesperson for the international global body, let's say, the steering group, from Namibia, who is also one of the most advanced for now, and where unions have been partly involved in the development of the analysis so far. And so that's what we're doing right now. So very briefly to conclude, if there's, I think, 3 things to remember from this presentation, which I hope you can say, if there's something that can stay in your mind, I think it should be these 3 points for unions working on the global acceleration. We really, and I've tried to connect this with SDGs, is achieve decent work creation, meaning with workers' participation, with workers and labor rights, with living wages, social protection in sustainable sectors with formal contracts, reducing inequalities within the framework of a just transition. So what we also mentioned before with social justice, fair redistribution, and what was mentioned by Bavika before. And of course, ensure union involvement, workers' representation at national level, and include unions' priorities in the so-called roadmap. So in this analysis and policy proposals. And yes, this is linked to SDG 16 in the sense of ensuring inclusive, participatory and representative decision-making at all levels. And I think I can stop here. Thank you very much. I'll stop sharing, and thanks for having me.
Thanks a lot, Beatrice. So I think everyone saw how the workers' perspective on the workers' organizations' perspective on the Global Accelerator, and also the importance of the participation of the workers in the Global Accelerator. I think this is really important, and this became really clear. And it's also very clear that both for the initiative, it's important that we have workers' voices there and the voices of workers' organizations and trade unions. But then also workers' organizations and trade unions are using the Global Accelerator to amplify their demands and their requests that they have already. So I think that's really important, and that's really great that we are working together like this. And as Bavika also explained, that's really one of the key pillars of the ILO, is this tripartism and social dialogue. So this is really, we cannot advance without it. That's what the ILO stands for. Okay, so we have a little bit of time left. So we decided that we would do a small case study with you, so that we can see, what does one of these integrated approaches look like in practice. So we invented a country called Fantasia, and the government of this invented country, Fantasia, decides to cut fossil fuel subsidies. Cutting fossil fuel subsidies is something that governments across the whole world are doing right now. But I decided not to focus on a specific country because I didn't want us to get bogged down in the national context, etc. So we will take a more zoomed out and abstract view. Just to explain briefly, fossil fuel subsidies are government actions, any kind of actions that reduce the price of fossil fuels for consumers. So there are different ways of doing this. For example, by reducing the cost of producing fossil fuels, or by giving added money to those people that sell fossil fuels so that they can lower the prices. So there are many ways of doing this through different kinds of financing means. But for our example, we don't need to go too much into the detail because we are looking at what happens when this stops. So it means that the government stops spending money on fossil fuels to make the fossil fuels cheaper for the people. So keeping in mind what we are talking about, right? We're talking about jobs and social protection. We're talking about poverty, inequality, and how to finance all of these investments in the social agenda. So in creating jobs and expanding social protection, what could be the effects of this policy? So there's a QR code again, and I would ask you to scan it. And when you are thinking about what could be effects, you can think, for example, what are the effects on fiscal space? So how much money the government has at its disposal to implement certain policies. You can think about the effects on the environment. You can think perhaps of the effects on workers. That will be, for example, via transport or via household spending. So these are just a couple of, ideas of what the effects of this type of policy could be all over, broadly speaking. So we will give you a couple minutes of time. They're not really wrong answers, I think. This, of course, also strongly depends on the national context, what the effect will be. And we can look at what you came up with. And also it's anonymous, so you can really go wild in your responses. We will not see who said what. So be creative, think about what effect this policy could have. Responses coming in. Indeed, less car use because it's expensive, right? It's more expensive to use the car. Then we have less tax incomes, which, yes, that can also be an effect. Investments in green energy, exactly, because of course, the people will still need access to energy. Increased energy poverty. Yeah, if it becomes more expensive, then it's more, well, people are perhaps less able to afford energy. Rise in energy poverty, exactly, that's linked to that. Poor people cannot commute. Yeah, that's a really good point. Shock to the economy. Yeah, indeed. Lack of skilled labor, very interesting. Chance for green shift. Yeah. Ooh, political turmoil. Yeah, that's perhaps at the end of this. That's really one of the end effects of what can happen. Absolutely. Let me see what else we have. Good environmental effect, exactly. Yeah. Excellent. Yeah, there are some really good ideas here. Correct. Yeah. Yeah, so there are really, you had all of the right ideas, right? So the fuel prices, if the subsidies are cut, fuel prices will increase, which can have, for example, as an effect, the decrease of fuel use. You have this here, that people will use less energy, perhaps, which can lead to energy poverty. But if the government stops spending money, right, this money it will save. So let's assume a government spent an amount of X on these fossil fuel subsidies every year. Then if they cut these subsidies, they will have this money, right? I mean, I'm simplifying here so that we can get to the point, right? So this means that the fiscal space increases a little bit, right? However, at the same time, of course, we have an increased cost for public and private transport. You have this here, increased cost of transport, exactly, and increased cost of using the car, things like this. And this is a problem, especially for workers who, or for households who are vulnerable, right, to poverty. If we look at very rich people, it will not make a big difference in their lives because they have so much disposable income anyway. Bon, so they pay a little bit more for some gas to take the bus. I don't know, it doesn't really matter. But if already a household is just above the poverty line, below the poverty line, perhaps an increase in these prices will have a huge impact on them because they will have much less money at their disposal, of course. And so this decreases the mobility of workers, or has the potential to decrease the mobility of workers. This was something poor people cannot commute, right? And if you just commute for fun, then you have to stop commuting. But what if you have to commute to work? What if you have to take the bus and you don't have a car and you cannot take the bike and et cetera, et cetera? So you have to commute, but suddenly the tickets for a bus, the prices for a bus ticket increase dramatically. So this is a huge challenge, right? This is why this policy of decreasing, of cutting fossil fuel subsidies by itself is very dangerous, right? It has the potential to increase poverty or inequality because it punishes vulnerable and poor households, while for richer households, it has less of an impact on their capacity to spend. So we want to, of course, give good advice to this government of Fantasia. So they cut their fossil fuel subsidies and then they have riots, they have public turmoil, as someone said, because the people are very unhappy, things are too expensive, workers can't get to their job, they can't make an income anymore, they can't feed their families, they can't pay rent. So this is a problem. So then what would we advise in the second question to the government of Fantasia to make this policy a bit more just, right? That it contributes to a just transition. So the government of Fantasia, of course, did this because they wanted to contribute to fighting climate change. They want to reduce carbon emissions, etc. They think we shouldn't be using, fossil fuels so much. And also they cannot afford anymore to pay these fossil fuel subsidies. They have to pay for other things. So that's why they decided to cut it. But now how can we change this policy and add some things to it maybe, or make it more specific to make sure that it contributes to a transition that is just for the workers and their families and the population? So here we are thinking about redistribution, broadly speaking, right? So we will give you also a couple of minutes to think about this. And then there's a second question behind the QR code that you should be able to answer. Ideas coming in. Yeah. So there are lots of ideas for how we can make public transport more accessible, even free public transport, which I think would be great, or I certainly would be a fan. I take public transport a lot. I would enjoy that a lot. Incentives for renewable energy, exactly, universal basic income. Yeah, that's very interesting. We can discuss about that. We have developed a bike infrastructure that's also really good alternative that would also support the green transition, right? The just transition. Yeah, we have social protection for the poor. Very good. 8 blue-collar commuters. Indeed, indeed. Yeah, make it progressive, subsidize public transport, investment in alternative. Excellent. Yeah, So you've all given really excellent and really interesting responses. So what we can see in real life in many countries that do this, right? One example that we can think of, for example, is Senegal, where they cut much more than fossil fuel subsidies. I think it was energy subsidies in total, is that in order to reduce the impact on poverty and inequality of this measure, the governments use the increased fiscal space, so the money that they save by not spending it on fossil fuel subsidies, right, for social assistance programs or cash transfers for vulnerable households. So here we're getting a little bit into the area of public spending and of what is a progressive or regressive measure. So if we have free public transport, if a government can afford that, I think that's great. Let's say the part about free public transport or the idea behind it is, of course, that it benefits everyone. So if a government can afford to do that, that's excellent. If the government perhaps doesn't have enough money and wants to focus the money that it has on those that need it the most, right? Then we focus on the vulnerable households. And here we are talking about cash transfers. So let's say, in an ideal world, right, you can do a quick calculation. Let's say if the price for the bus ticket doubles, then the government can simply give the amount that is added to the bus ticket in cash to the vulnerable households. So for them, actually, the price of the bus ticket doesn't change. This is, of course, not very feasible in practice, but this is kind of along the lines of the idea behind this, right? And an example like this shows why social protection is so important to achieve a just transition. This is also what Beatrice said earlier, right? If we only work towards having, in this example, so we're talking about a transition to a carbon neutral economy with increased biodiversity. If we only focus on the environmental aspects of that, and we ignore the effects that some of these policies might have on humans, especially on workers and their families and the wider population, then we will have, as you rightly said in the first example, there is a risk, right, that we will have public turmoil, that people will be very unhappy and that they will not be able to prosper, and there will be no social justice for them under these types of policies. So that's why we add here a component of social protection that supports workers and their families and vulnerable households to be able to, also support this transition. Because of course, if they are also aware that, they are being supported, they don't have to suffer because of this disproportionately, then they are much more likely to support this, much more likely to support these policies, and much more likely to stand behind the necessary policies that will lead us through these transitions. Let me just check here if there was anything else that we didn't mention. I think, I think those were the main points that we wanted to bring across here in this case study. So these are the types of approaches that we are aiming for with the Global Accelerator. Of course, there are many more complex approaches that then also link to the formalization of jobs, that link to the creation of enterprises, the payment of social protection benefits, etc. There are many approaches already, integrated approaches that exist in the world. We just have to go out and look for them. And that's why I would also encourage you to look at the website of the Global Accelerator. I can put it in the chat very shortly. It's www.unglobalaccelerator.org or .com. I will have to double check. I don't want to tell you a lie. But I will encourage you to look at that there. You can already see there are some videos and some articles, testimonies from Pathfinder countries for how the Global Accelerator is already being implemented at country level. So if you're more interested in this and how we can accelerate the progress towards the SDGs 1 and 8, towards decent work and universal social protection for everyone, then I really encourage you to look at that, how we can get there faster and with more impact. And I think this is where we will stop the presentation, and we will open for questions. If you have any, please feel free to put them in the chat or to raise your hand if you wish. I will give you some time in case people are typing, because I'm not sure if I can see if anyone is typing. So I want you to have the time to really write what you are thinking and what you are thinking about. I think someone earlier made a very interesting observation about whether it might be useful to add social aspects, right? To not only look at GDP per capita when we think about development and how we measure, you know, these types of things, but also to add social indicators. That's true. That's also what the ILO advocates for. That's why we promote this idea of human-centered economic development and economic recovery in the case of post-crisis situations, where we focus on really how are the humans doing, and the fact that we, for example, need job-rich growth and not just any kind of growth that can be based on other things and not create jobs. So yeah, I think that's a really important point. Otherwise, it seems like we explained everything so well, and you are now all convinced of this, which is great. Sami, I see you have a question. Yeah, please come in. I hope you can unmute yourself. No, you cannot unmute yourself. Oh, well, this is okay. Now you
go.
okay.
Yeah, thank you for the great presentation. It was very insightful. I came up with one question. Have the challenges in achieving just transformation and the other SDGs been more of a political or technical in nature, in your view? Thank you.
Thanks a lot. That's a really interesting question. I'm also looking at, I don't want to, you know, just because I'm speaking, I want to respond, but Beatrice Bavica, if you want to come in, you give me a sign, yeah? And otherwise I will go ahead, if that's okay with you. Great. That's a very good question. I think, as with most things, the answer will be something like, it depends, or there's a mix, right? I think that there is something important to be said about political will, right? So if you remember in the beginning, we had a question where we asked you, what are the biggest challenges that in your country people face when trying to access productive employment or social protection? And one of the options was lack of political will or commitment. And I saw that some people chose this. So this is really an issue. It's a political question to prioritize this and to prioritize these investments, right? Because at the beginning, yes, you have to take money into hands and, you know, invest it. So this is the key point. At the same time, what we are trying to do with the Global Accelerator in order to address this, right, is we have in the beginning this high-level political commitment. So this is really showing political will. Not every, you can see we have 17 Pathfinder countries. We are in discussions with more countries, so we are hoping that many more will join, but not every country will join, right? Because not every country wants to prioritize this at this moment in time for different reasons. Not every government wants to. And then when we talk to governments, both once before they join and then once they have joined, and what we really try to emphasize is the return on investment that you have, right? So if you decide to show political will and prioritize this, it's not like, you know, you're throwing the money out of the window. There is a very clear and proven return on investment. There are studies that show that in some countries, investing $1 in social protection can yield up to $5 in return in GDP later. So of course, the process is that you spend the money on social protection, for example, on child benefits. And then because of this, it can also be other benefits, right? There are lots of effects going criss and cross in social protection. But because of this access to social protection in a household, a child perhaps can go to school. And we all know that for every additional year of schooling that a child has, its income, its future income increases, right? So this child then has access to schooling, perhaps access to better healthcare, etc. Then will later have a different job, a higher income, perhaps. And then we'll pay taxes, which will go back to the state. So, right, it starts, and the state can then take these taxes and reinvest if it wants in social protection. So this is really the cycle that we are trying to do here. And there's evidence of this. Of course, how high the multiplier effect is depends on many factors. But yeah, this is proven. And so we try to convince governments by this. At the same time, of course, we also provide technical support. And of course, it's also what we talked about, really the key of breaking these silos and working together, not only, of course, between ministries and governments, but also within the UN, with our social partners, with the CSOs, civil society organizations, etc. So this is really about, I would say perhaps less about a lack of knowledge or understanding, because I think we have a lot of knowledge and understanding about these things in the world, but about bringing it together and making sure that the right people are talking to each other at the right point in time. So that would be my answer to your very good question. Sorry, I spoke for a long time. I don't know if Beatrice or Bavika want to add something to this.
Thank you, Anna. I think your response was great, and I can totally I could repeat what you mentioned. So I want just one thing that I can add is that there is plenty of great commitments at political level, and also there are some technical solutions offered within this statements, these agreements, and international level discussions and agreements. But often, so they remain there. So something that we often see also in the processes around the COP is that we have the agreements there, for example, for a just transition work program, and then at the following COP, we want to rework this principles and not going forward to put them into practice. So now the proposal in Bonn at the UN CCC conference was to create an action plan, and again, so I'm not against any of this, of course, nor is the RTUC, but of course there's plenty of great commitments, but people who are privileged enough to be in the discussion around the table should also give up around a bit of that privilege and go on with the implementation. And also often higher income countries and the governments that represent these countries have to recognize some historical responsibilities from the past and also from today, because we have to there's no social protection, no social justice on a planet that doesn't exist any longer. So there's great responsibilities from the past and from today that often are a bit missing in this discussion. So I think that sometimes political will is missing at many levels. But otherwise, I totally agree with what Anna just mentioned. So I'll stop here, but that's an interesting question.
Thanks a lot, Beatrice, for adding. Absolutely agree. And thanks, Sami, for the question. I hope no one else has any burning questions, because I think we are slowly starting to run out of time. So I will hand the floor back to Bavika for some closing remarks.
Thank you. Thanks, Anna. Thanks, Beatrice. All right. So we have a couple of slides. We won't take very long. I know it's been a long time that you have been in front of your screens, so we won't make that any longer for you. Very quickly, there are certain global reports that are published by the International Labour Organization, some of which are annual reports. So you can also see a trend emerging if you go back in history and look at those reports. A few prominent ones that you can also go through, and we would highly encourage you to go through if you are interested in the world of work and social protection, is the report on World Employment and Social Outlook, which is the WESO report. The other one will be Global Wage Report, World Social Security Report, and journals that are published regularly. There are also 3 other outputs by the ILO, namely International Labour Review, International Journal of Labour Research, and International Social Security Review. You will see that very recently, last month, we had International Labour Conference 2024. So I'm sure many of you would be aware of the ongoing discussions and arguments that were emerging from the conference, but even if not, you can always go back and refer to these reports, and you'll have a fair bit of idea of where the world of work is progressing towards. Just a quick recap, there are 187 member states of the ILO, about 40 field offices and 191 conventions. There are also 208 recommendations and 6 declarations. We have just put together the keywords that we usually interact with on a daily basis at ILO, and I'm pretty sure half of which you have also interacted with during the course of this presentation. And I hope that you continue to engage with these, namely elimination of child labor, equality of opportunity and treatment, working time, wages, social security, most of all, and social policy, migrant workers, violence and harassment, domestic workers. I mean, it's a bunch. So I hope you find time to go through ILO's resources. We have a very nice new website up, and I'm sure you would like to interact with it. It's quite fun to use. I've used it myself, so I hope you all go ahead and use the same. Now, what to remember on top of the 3 points that Beatrice shared with us. So now this is the 4th point for you to remember, that ILO was born out of crisis with real life struggles for equity centered on the workplace, which was rooted in real economy and responded to social and economic problems of today. The current program at ILO focuses on social justice, and I'm sure it will continue to focus on that for years to come. ILO has a large training and research capacity, something that I had mentioned in the beginning, that a team that I am also a part of, and even ITC ILO focuses on. And lastly, ILO has been supporting work on social justice since 1919, more than a century ago, in various fields through tripartism. From Anna's presentation on Global Accelerator, there are 3 pillars of accelerating progress towards the social SDGs, which are the following. First would be by integrating job creation, social protection, expansion, skills development, enterprise support, and ensuring that ongoing transitions are just for workers as well as their families. We just saw a case study on the same. Second would be by supporting countries to develop domestic resources for investment, investing in the people, as we have been talking about, in the social agenda, and complementing this with international financing. And we saw the 2 cylinders. How do we bring the financing together to ensure that fiscal space increases for social protection spending? And lastly, through stronger partnerships within the United Nations, not working in silos, remember, and coming together, whole of government approach with development partners, international financial institutions to ensure efficient collaboration with Pathfinder country governments. And I hope that by the time we all connect next year, your country is one of the Pathfinder countries, and we see that graph going up when we run the Mentimeter again. On that thought, I would leave you with this one quotation from the Nobel Peace Prize laureate Juan Manuel Santos, who perfectly quotes the conclusion more so that I could. Achieving social justice means more jobs and less poverty and inequality. Decent work is a pillar of this effort, to which labor policies and more equitable economic development are essential. And I think with that, we come to the end of the presentation. I'm sure that many of you would connect with us on LinkedIn. We'll be very happy to get in touch with you and respond to any queries that we couldn't today due to the limited time. But hopefully you will write to us and we'll stay in touch. So thank you all for joining.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Nice to have seen you all.